We all knew that moving to 105 players on the roster for Kansas State's football team was going to be hard, but we didn't realize it was going to be this difficult. Plenty of unknowns. So, what does that mean? Let's talk about it right here on Locked On Kansas State.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Another great week here at Locked On Kansas State. We got an excellent episode for you today. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Well, head on over to turbotax.com and get matched with your expert today. Today, we're breaking down our initial thoughts as Kansas State begins their spring practices this past weekend, from the issues from the new 105 roster limit to star players stepping up all the way to potential position changes. We're going to dig into that as we get closer to the opening of college football season, week 0 against Iowa State in Dublin. We had the opportunity to hear from Coach Kleiman this past week. We're going to get, it looks like we're going to get a conversation from him once a week heading into the rest of the month, if you will, while they're doing these spring practices. Only 10 spring practices on the slate. That is a talking point that we need to get to in this one. They shortened up this period, but they moved a lot of it front-loaded, if you will. They had 2 to 3 extra weeks of strength training, and it sounds like it has paid off. As the overall team, they put out this really cool graphic saying that they improved with 700 pounds of muscle over the team. Absolutely incredible. Coach Kleiman seemed very impressed and very excited about the gains and the improvements that they've made moving forward, and they feel like they're a bigger and stronger team. And when you're in the Big 12, one of the toughest conferences, if not the toughest conference in all of college football, you need every little small thing that matters moving into the new year. There is no other conference that has more parity like the Big 12, finding those extra edges, something that maybe you didn't have last year, even when you did start 7-1. And that's huge. And they continue to talk about not only Coach Kleiman, but the other players that they interviewed. And we're going to get to that in this episode, that they all have this, it almost feels like they have this chip on their shoulder. They remember last season. Although there's a lot of momentum coming into this program from the Rate Bowl win, from the recruiting standpoint, from the transfer portal, and now this amazing offseason, the strength program that they've had, it sounds like they're not satisfied. And that is absolutely wonderful. But before we get into that, I think the biggest thing we need to address is basically what Coach Kleiman's opening remarks were as well. He really dug into how unhappy and how he is not in favor of this new 105 roster limit, and for very good reason. He laid down the law and the rules of all the feelings that him and I'm assuming the rest of the coaching staff and probably the entire roster feels as well about this new shift to the 105 roster limit. Now, I will say this, as of today, we are waiting for a hearing on Capitol Hill, and technically, and I guess I really didn't know this until Coach Kleiman brought this up, I had to reread the report. Technically, it's not fully going to happen as of right now. It's not set in stone that we will move to this 105, but they're pretty sure it's going to happen. We will hear it today with the final hearing on Capitol Hill, and then they're looking to lobby more, as we mentioned just a few days ago when we were talking about one of the Ross Dellinger reports, that they're going to have a sports day where they're continuing to lobby at the nation's capital on the 9th. But we should have more information about if it's set in stone with the 105 at some point today. And of course, we're going to let you know on this show if anything changes. But we're going by what we have heard in the past about this new move to 105. It technically has to be done before you start play. So in case of Kansas State, before they head on the plane and head to Dublin to play Iowa State. Now, Coach Kleiman seems to have a little bit better head on his shoulder and was thinking more about not just the players that he's going to keep, but the players that are currently in his program that are going to have to find a new place to play. And because you're also a college university, that means you're also going to have to find a new place to go to school, worry about your career in the future. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that the NCAA is just not paying attention to. And there are definitely a lot of details that are just not being fixed. And we'll talk about that in a second. But what Coach Kleiman said, and I thought this was really cool. And it really gave me just another tip of the cap to him and another just sign of respect. I certainly respect Coach Kleiman, what he has done with this program and just the way he carries himself. It's just such a good feeling knowing that he is your head football coach. But he said they're going to make these cuts a lot earlier than maybe some of these other teams, maybe in the conference or just the nation in general, because they want to give those players an opportunity to find another place to play. And I love that because that is a big picture win down the road. That might not be a win right now, letting some players go. And obviously some hard decisions are going to have to be made, but people hear that, whether it's an agent, whether it's a player, whether it's a prospective prospect that is listening to these coach press conferences because you're thinking about possibly committing to Kansas State. Those small things go a long way. And if you're thinking about a player that you know is not going to be in your program, but you're thinking about his future, regardless if it has anything to do with wearing a Kansas State uniform, maybe even never at all, or you've had him for some time, but they have to find a place to go elsewhere, and you are actively thinking about that player instead of making a longer stride to maybe decide if they're going to stay on the team and then, quite frankly, screw them over in the future. Players pay attention to that. And that decision, if he follows through, and I have no reason to believe he won't, is going to serve greatly long term. Players are going to commit to wanting to play for Kansas State because they know they have a coach that, even if they don't make this squad, is looking out for them so they can set themselves up for success and go elsewhere. Now, that's not the greatest thing in the world for Kansas State's success, like as of right now, if you will, because you would want to be able to keep the players that all the way up until the very end in case there's injuries or whatever the case may be, and then pick your best 105 available heading into Dublin. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of different things that come into play with that, but I think that's the right decision, what Coach Kleiman said, saying he's going to make these cuts a lot sooner than probably other teams are in the long picture. I think this is the right move. I think it's the ethical move, the moral move, whatever you want to call it. I really love this decision. And I think it's a respectful decision. And we are a respectful institution, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I was mentioning a couple other things too. Still unsure of a lot of details with this 105 thing. Obviously, we didn't even know that it was officially official, right? We're finding that out today if it's actually going to be 105. But hopefully we find some new things as well. And Coach Kleiman kind of brought this up with some questions because it sounded like he's not even sure. Is there an injured reserve, right? We don't know if there's an injured reserve in here. And there's a lot of players that, if there are injuries, could benefit from that. Do they count towards the 105? We do know that red shirts as of right now sound like they're going to be, which is okay. I think that's fine. I think you can handle that. But if you have injuries, say you have a long-term injury, let's say you have a player that's been committed to Kansas State for their 3 years, if you will. And I'm not pointing out any players because I don't actually, this is just a hypothetical situation here. I don't have anybody in mind. But say they tear their ACL and they're out for the entire season, but you want to hope that they can be ready to go for the next year. Do they count as 105 knowing that you're not going to have them at all? Do you cut them and ruin the fact of not having a scholarship while they're, building back up and then bring them back in? Technically taking away an entire academic year from them because that means they're going to have to pay for their schooling. I'm sure that there's ways around that, but maybe not. Right? Are you going to do that? I'm sure if we are in the situation that we're in right now and we don't hear any further details, I'm not saying Kansas State does that, but I'm sure there are going to be some programs across the country that make some cuts with some long-term injuries, regardless of who the player is, so they can make sure they get that one extra player on the roster because of the depth and how important it's going to be down the line. Coach Kleiman talked about the freshman class, the 25 freshmen. He said those are part of the 105. He said they were recruited into the 105. So they will not be a part of the cuts. So something to keep in mind there. Got a little bit of a better idea about the freshmen. They will be safe. And he did say they will most likely play more. They will most likely have a bigger role, the freshman class, heading into the year. Now, whether it's just special teams or actually making a bigger impact, Lincoln Cure, I'm looking at you. That will be yet to be determined. But interesting move here. What this 105 is going to do with not just Kansas State, not just the Big 12, but all of college football. We're going to learn more about that in the coming days, especially with this new hearing, this final hearing happening today, April 7th, on Capitol Hill. I'm sure we'll get a report. And if anything drastically changes, we'll pop up and have a show about it. Regardless, we'll probably talk about it on an upcoming show, but if it's drastic enough, it'll be our opening headline and we'll rock and roll with it for sure. Because there's plenty to talk about. I want to make sure you are informed about not just things going on with Kansas State's football and all of athletics, but with the Big 12, with NCAA as a whole. I think that encompasses being a fan outside the box of just Wildcat news. And we're going to have you covered here all the time on Locked On Kansas State. I loved what he said about Avery Johnson. Absolutely loved what he said about the quarterback of the Kansas State Wildcats. And I liked what he said as well. Let's dig into that next here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, this message is a sponsor from Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. As an expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find your every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Disclaimer, only available with TurboTax Live service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I thank you so much for making this show your first listen every single day. It really means so much to me, more than you know. And just watching the comments come in, and we're starting to see more views on both the audio and YouTube side. It's such an amazing thing knowing the community that we're in. And we are so close to 800 subscribers. It feels like just last week I was thanking you for 700. And we are so close to getting to that next milestone. So thank you so much. If you haven't already, click subscribe, join the journey, join the adventure here at Locked On Kansas State. We're diving into the press conference of starting spring practice. I know we're a couple days late, had some weather issues here, and I'm sure you saw with across the Midwest, there was a bunch of weather issues, but they were also dealing with on the West Coast. I'm out on the West Coast right now. Wife's on some military orders, and we also dealt with some weather. It was insane, and I apologize I didn't get some stuff out to you on a Friday, but we're back and we're ready to roll for another strong week here on the show. I thought what was said by Avery Johnson was absolutely incredible. And I guess I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. When I was watching the presser from Coach Kleiman, I was excited. I was getting the chills again, knowing that we're back in college football season. But after I went in order, I watched Coach Kleiman's first, then I watched the players, and I ended with Avery Johnson. And when I was there with Avery Johnson, when I finally got to, listen to his stuff, I was ready to run through a wall. I mean, I was ready. A brick wall, styrofoam, you name it. It didn't matter. Like, I was ready to roll. The way that Avery Johnson is starting to turn himself into this leader is really impressive. And I'm not saying he wasn't one last year. He was a team captain, but you can tell something's different. You can already get the feeling. I didn't get this feeling last year from him. It was more of a first-year quarterback, give him the C because the team. It just makes sense there. It's different now. it feels almost like it's earned. Like there was no question. Avery Johnson is a captain, is a leader. And I'm already getting that feeling in the first presser, his first interview heading into the new year. I'm sure you saw it on social media, but during this off-season workout period with the strength and conditioning, he was one of the players that hit 23 miles an hour. They were talking about that with his speed. He's pushing for 24, by the way. And Coach Kleiman, kind of bouncing back before with the Avery Johnson conversation, but what Coach Kleiman said was all those guys, there was multiple guys that hit the 23 mile an hour club, but all of them who did so put on an average of about 11 pounds of muscle during that off-season time. I mean, how incredible is that? They referred to what Jacob Parrish did during his time, went from 175 to 200 pounds, and then referenced what he did at the combine, showing that you can transform your body to be more, have more longevity, have more strength, and not lose a bit of speed. And we're starting to see that with Avery Johnson and some of these other players that we're going to get to in just a minute. What Coach Kleiman said, though, about his natural rise to more leadership was encouraging, super encouraging, actually. Talked about how, they didn't ask much of him last year, and that kind of like in the leadership role, if you will. And that kind of, made sense. They wanted him to focus on being the first-year quarterback, the first-year starter, if you will, after moving on from Will Howard, changing the role, the changing of the sword, if you will, passing on the torch. Probably used the right phrase. And he just talked about how players are now going to him, and he's stepping up to the challenge. Hearing this already at the beginning of April, knowing how far away we still are from the regular season, that we're just starting spring camp, we still have fall camp to go. There's going to be some tough cuts to make to get to 105. And your quarterback, your second-year quarterback, who I think is going to make a huge step forward with Matt Wells as his offensive coordinator calling the plays. You can tell they have a great relationship already just from what the small things that he says. It's exciting. It is super exciting. And if you thought the 7-1 start was great last year, think of all this momentum we had after the Rape Bowl. I'll say it again. I'm not afraid. This recruiting class, this transfer class, not many players left. At least not many impactful players left in the portal. You had a couple impactful players leaving the draft, but that was kind of expected. I think they bounced back and retooled very nicely for those positions, especially in the secondary. This team is I'm excited. This team's going to be on one. And this is why I continue to say, and it's not just because I host a podcast for this program, but I think they are going to be back in the Big 12 championship game for the first time since 2022. I'm predicting against BYU, and the reason I predict against them is because they don't have a chance to see Kansas State in the regular season. And I think Kansas State can find themselves back in the college football playoffs with the momentum they have had. If it continues on, they continue to build and have this great strength and everything that's needed to be done, there's no reason not to have that expectation. And I think that's a valid expectation from what we have seen over the past couple of years from this football team. And although the schedule could be tough, and you could say that any year. You could say that any year. One of our non-conference games is against a conference opponent, against the toughest conference in college football when it comes to the fact of parity. So you could say that any year that the schedule is going to be tough. Kansas State took care of it early last year. They ran to an issue, a detour, if you will, last season. I don't think they make that same mistake in year 2 of Avery Johnson starting under center. I don't. I think you're going to be in a really good spot. The coach's thoughts on the entire leadership group I thought was really exciting. They talk about how they have this leadership council and they have multiple players on there, older guys that step up and take leadership roles, and they meet with them multiple times a week. And one of the things I took from that Coach Kleiman said was that group is a more well-rounded and cohesive group compared to years past. He would say that in years past, they had a certain amount of people that would step up and be loud, and and you had a couple people who were just sit back and quiet. He said it's not like that this year. Everyone that's on that council is ready to make an impact and lead. That's a great feeling. You have multiple people that want to not only make this team better, but make sure that they are the best they possibly can be. Count me in. Count me absolutely in. Maybe I just missed football. Maybe that was it. Maybe I just was longing for having some of this kind of talk. Maybe after the basketball season, I just needed these good vibes. I don't know what it was, but I'll tell you this. It felt good and it felt exciting knowing that college football was back for Kansas State, and the optimism, in my opinion, has never been higher. I love this momentum curve that they're on. And I think we're still on the uphill of this roller coaster. I think it's one of those, it's like the Six Flags Superman. Like, it's going high, guys. We're going up there. We're still climbing the ladder. And I'm really excited for what's to come this season. There was a couple other shout outs talking about going into the first spring practice, getting ready to go, that involved some new transfers that I want to get into as well. And there was an interesting talk, and I don't know how true it is, but I want to get your thoughts about possibly a position change. So we'll get into that. And then we'll finish the show with a contrasting opinion already between Kansas State and Iowa State as they head into Iowa. And what's that mean, and which one's right in your opinion? We'll finish that up right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. No, it is a complete financial command center that you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in just one place. So you stop managing your money and start building your wealth. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances right now with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Digging into college football never feels bad, always feels great when we get to talk about college football in April, and it feels good in every other month, to be completely honest as well. If you haven't already, hit subscribe. Join the adventure of Locked On Kansas State as we are slowly but getting there. Actually, not slow. It's been quite quick getting to 800 subscribers. If you're listening on the audio side, I thank you as well. It's always great having those audio numbers. And if you haven't, I'd love a 5-star review. That helps push it out even more to more Kansas State folks. And we are slowly getting to be a little more closer to than Lockdown Jayhawks. One of these days we will be with more subscribers than them. And then I can't hear them saying that we're little brother anymore, because that is definitely not the case. You know, there was some talk here from Coach Kleiman. He kind of gave some shout outs as he was finishing off and answering some questions from the media. And by the way, it was a very chill, laid back media session, which it seems to always be. I think everybody was just excited to be back in the room with Coach Kleiman, and don't blame him whatsoever. One of the first shout outs that I heard that really just sparked my interest was how he talked about the new wide receivers in the room, because we talked about it on this show. And I know it's been a conversation. I mean, whatever show you listen to about Kansas State, about how the wide receiver room needed an upgrade. You know, obviously losing Trey Spivey in the transfer portal, Dante Cephas heads out. We didn't know what was going to happen with Jace Brown. Thankfully, he stays. But they add a whole bunch of other players in the portal: Caleb Medford, Jerron Bradley, and Jerron Tibbs. And he talks about how those players, because of their experience, is showing just how things are done right with workouts, with leadership. He said everywhere they're turned, they're doing the right things. And he was mentioning some of the workouts. And not only did he say it, but Avery Johnson said the same thing during his little media scrum as well. Super exciting hearing that from your wide receivers. Probably arguably the biggest question mark, at least on the offensive side. I think you might be able to make an argument that what will happen with the secondary could be the biggest question mark as well. I would argue that wide receiver is going to be the biggest question mark heading into Dublin. But if you get these kind of feelings already from the first spring practice, from knowing what you saw from these workouts, now, obviously, Coach Kleiman said this, and he 100% is true. He said, we'll see what happens on the field. He's not wrong. I mean, that's obviously the things that matter the most. But doing those small things right usually lead to good things on the field, usually lead to successful things heading into the actual play on the football field. So exciting that right off the bat, he's pointing out the wide receiver room, especially those new transfers coming in, all three of them. Also talked about George Fitzpatrick, offensive lineman out of Ohio State, talked about how great of a offseason he had. Now, he did mention that he really didn't have a break because he was working out with Ohio State on their national championship run all the way up until he transferred over to Manhattan. But continued on it, said he had a great first phase here. Really excited, really impressed with what they saw from him, and called him, and this might be a little heads up to what we might expect with the offensive line heading into the new year, called him a plug and play guy. It was, quote, plug and play. Pretty awesome knowing that, because, there's some question marks. What are we going to get? Is he going to be possibly the starting right tackle this year? No, I would say probably between him and Hawkins, it's probably battling from right tackle. Would you say that's the case? Am I missing somebody there? I think, Brandon Snee, the other transfer, and Pastor, probably the other side of tackles. It's probably the four tackles battling for position. If I'm missing someone, let me know. The comment description below. It's always, definitely could always miss a player for sure. But really excited. Plug and play. I mean, we're already getting some good tidbits from Coach Kleiman right off the bat. VJ Payne had an interview, and I thought this was super exciting. And I don't know how serious he was, but he was, he was a part of the 23-mile-an-hour club, and he was technically the fastest player on the Kansas State football team. And he plays safety right now, but there was a conversation and a question about, could he possibly move the corner? And he said he wasn't afraid. He'd be down to move the corner. He wouldn't be afraid to, quote, press, be in the press. And if you're getting that type of speed and being able to press, especially with some of the other corners you brought in the transfer portal, Marion Fortenberry for one, I mean, that's exciting. And you brought in a couple other safeties, Gunnar Maldonado. We don't know where Moss is going to sit. Could be the jack safety. But the opportunity to be able to have more versatility in that secondary, I think, is only going to make things better. So interesting to see what we see from VJ Payne. Maybe he makes some reps at corner, also plays safety. We saw some of the other players in the Rate Bowl, some of the younger players step up as well, something that was absolutely needed. Zayshawn Rich. We saw McIntosh as well. Name almost escaped me, but thankfully I grabbed it on back. So we'll see. But exciting. I don't know how serious it is, but definitely going to keep my eye on it and see if we get some reps with him at corner doing some man cover, some press. I mean, with that type of speed, if you can make it happen, then that's exciting, because that means there's more opportunities for the pass rush. There's more opportunities for the coverage to, make it longer and more difficult for the quarterback to get passes out, meaning turnovers, meaning, just overall. I mean, having a dominant press coverage corner, if VJ Payne could turn into that because of his speed, I mean, that just opens up so many opportunities for the defense, not just the secondary. So hopefully that can happen down the road. And then we'll finish up this episode with just a little contrasting opinion. I saw this on social media. I figured it'd be worth saying, but Alec Busey, he is 24/7 writer for Cyclone Alert for Iowa State. And he talks about how some of the position groups, and in this case, he talked about defensive line coach Eli Rashad, that he stressed that his position group will need, quote, all 15 of spring practices to prepare for 2025. Well, as you know, Kansas State's only doing 10 practices in spring and focus more on the strength and conditioning. So which one's right? Which one is the better idea? Was it more important for this team to worry about strength and conditioning and take away 5 practices, basically take away a week of practices and focus on the building, the strength and the muscle and the speed that we're starting to see from this team? Or is it going to be the flip side? Is Iowa State who's leaning towards the other thing with the 15 practices, making sure that their defensive line in this case, has every opportunity to improve and get better? I don't know what the answer is. I think only time will tell. But what do you think? You think the 10 practices is going to be a good thing, a blessing in the skies, if you will, because they front loaded and got a lot of work done heading into the new year? Now they can focus on maybe some other things when they're not practicing. Avery Johnson talks about this team needing to be a player-led team. Just because they don't have an official spring practice doesn't mean they're not getting work done. So I'm leaning towards the Kansas State side, only the 10 practices being the more beneficial personally. But let me know your thoughts in the comment description below. A lot of questions here on this show. So a lot of comments should be coming in for this one. So let me know in the comment description below. Thank you for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen today. For your second listen, check this out. Check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez as your favorite collegiate players. Get ready for that next level. We have a couple definitely getting ready to get drafted. Get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. So find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please like the video. Please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.